becomes, how do we know that it's not just a kidnapping? How do we really know? So there are so many violations right now to our basic rights that it could happen to us anytime. And we have seen US citizens arrested and detained. We have seen this all over the country, not just in the Chicago area. So I am overwhelmed. I'm sure we all are. I have to tell you, I go to court every day for 20 to 25 different clients every day. So in 1 hour, and a lot of it's on Zoom, thank goodness, right? In every hour, I'm waiting with 4 or 5 different screens open, waiting to be called. And every single one of my clients was arrested unlawfully. There was no judicial warrant for their arrest. They were detained for no reason other than not looking like me, right? Just not looking like me. And for not maybe speaking English as fluently as some of us in this room, right? And English, up until March of 2025, was not the official language of our country. We never had one. There is no rule whatsoever before this administration, his second term. There was no rule at all that documents have to be written only in English, or that we have to speak only English in schools. There has never been a federal law that says English is the official language of this country until March. So now when people are being detained unlawfully and they're not speaking English fluently, it just seems so strange, right? So I have so much to say on the topic that I didn't even know where to start. I brought a PowerPoint just in case we had that type of presentation going. But the biggest thing is that there's so much more we can do, right? There's so much more we can do. In my daily life, I rub shoulders with people who don't believe the same things that I do. They don't believe in caring for our neighbors. They don't believe in tzedakah, for example. They don't believe that anyone else other than themselves might matter, right? And I see people every day who throw questions my way, and it makes me cringe, right? It makes me cringe. I have to wonder, where did they get this information from? And there's so much information out there, social media, certain news sources, but it may not be accurate, and it's being presented as accurate. For example, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, continuously says that undocumented immigrants are abusing healthcare and Medicaid and the medical systems, right? The hospitals. Is this true in any way?
No.
No, but he keeps saying this on national news for all of the people who are watching to believe that this is the official word. How do we know who to trust? How do we know what's real? So you could come to someone like me, who is already a little bit overloaded, or you can just dig a little deeper, find the facts, find the real information. The medical insurance issue has always been such a sore topic for me because I hear it all the time, right? I hear it all the time. I worked in a non-for-profit for many, many years, and I had undocumented, very low income people coming to my office asking, can I get help for this medical issue that I have? No, your US citizen children can. Whoever in your home was born here or has obtained residence or citizenship or work permits in certain categories, they are entitled to our health insurance, but you're not until you get your immigration paperwork in order, right? So it's not a permanent no. It's once you have established your status here in legal categories, then you can start to obtain some of the benefits that are out there. So that's just one topic. Imagine, when the Speaker of the House, who's, I think, third in line, right? Second in line for the presidency, can't get the information to the people in the right way with the truth. That is terrifying, right? So that's just one example. I mean, we can make this a panel, and I can maybe pass this over to Ethan for a bit to talk about what's going on in your world, and we'll come back to mine. What do you think?
Sure.
Okay.
Let me introduce Ethan to you. This is Ethan Aronson. Ethan Aronson is an organizer with an organization called Arise. And when I first encountered Arise, it was called Interfaith Worker Justice. So, which describes what the organization does. So it's an interfaith organization, and Aaron's been an amazing organizer of the interfaith community. And I know you do a lot of things that I know nothing about, but the things that I've seen are getting, people out there to Broadview to protest, helping people know your rights kinds of things, and at helping create kind of rapid response networks as well. So Ethan has really been on the front line of this in every possible way, including, I could show you the video. You probably haven't watched it.
Once or twice.
Once or twice. Of Ethan being pulled out of the crowd by his neck by the police and at Broadview to be arrested. And when at an interfaith gathering, 21 people of faith were arrested. Ethan was held the longest, almost 18 hours, maybe 13 hours. But we were waiting on a Friday night to hear when is Ethan coming out. And I was actually with Quincy Worthington that night, because Quincy and I did a pulpit exchange. So we were both kind of watching our Signal chats to check on you. And for me, the most poignant moment, in a sense, was your talit, torn off of you and on the ground in the street where the police were. And Rich was trying to get someone to give him the talit. I was trying to get somebody finally got somebody who was kind, had an ounce of kindness and went and picked it up. And I presume you got it back.
I did.
I had to ask you. But that's an image that I hold in my head, from that day, a very powerful one. So I want to turn it over to Ethan to tell us a little bit about what's going on.
So, thank you so much, Rabbi Ike. Thank you so much.
Close to
Oh, there we go. It's great to be with all of you. So I'm the faith organizer at an organization called Arise Chicago. We organize a faith community around workers' rights, and specifically the rights of immigrant workers. So, for example, workers who are experiencing unsafe working conditions, experiencing wage theft, experiencing race-based, racial discrimination, gender-based violence, and in the workplace, all sorts of things that happen all the time. And as we're talking about immigration enforcement, something I really want folks to understand is that immigration enforcement is very much related to workplace issues, because one of the functions of immigration enforcement is to scare workers to not speak up about their rights. And that's something that we're seeing all across Chicago. I want to share just a little piece of Torah, if that's okay. That's been on my mind the last few months. There's a famous rabbi called the Eish Kodesh, who was the rabbi in the Warsaw Ghetto. And he wrote a lot of different Divrei Torah, but he wrote a discourse about the story of Noah, where he establishes these two categories that I absolutely love and have been thinking a lot. He says there's two categories. One are people who are called hafachpach, one of my favorite words, which means flip-floppers. And some people are kashe oref. They are stiff-necked. And they're stubborn. And God initially criticizes the Jewish people and says, "Oh, you're too kashe oref, you're too stubborn." And Moses actually responds back to God and says, "Well, would you rather we be hafachbach? Would you rather that the Jewish people be just flipped this way or that based on the wind? Or should we actually be kashay oref? Should we be a little stiff-necked? And actually, and the Eish Kodesh who's writing this in the Warsaw Ghetto, he says in the moments of trial, in the moments where there's an overwhelming amount of violence, those are the moments where we have to be the most stiff-necked. Those are the moments we have to be the most clear that when our scriptures say, love our neighbors, that's serious. That is something that should burn within us, right? And I feel like the last 3 months in Chicago has been a moment of that kind of trial, right? A moment where we've seen violence against our neighbors at a scale that's larger than I've ever seen violence in my lifetime. So I just want to share a little bit about what's happened in the last 3 months. So between September 9th and November 15th, 3,000 of our neighbors have been abducted from their homes, workplaces, schools, communities, places of worship. On Friday, September 12th, Wilan Jimenez, a day laborer and member of the Workers' Center Latino Union, was detained by ICE on his way to a barbershop in Little Village. His lawyers believe he was targeted because he was involved in a lawsuit against Home Depot for racial profiling. That same day in Franklin Park, Silverio Villegas Gonzalez was murdered by ICE. He was stopped in his vehicle after dropping off his kids at a daycare. He was on his way to work. When he tried to get away from ICE, they shot him in the neck. On Wednesday, September 17th, 6 roofers in Naperville were surrounded on all sides by ICE, who kicked away the ladders so that the roofers couldn't come down. 5 of them jumped off the roof to escape and then were detained. All of them had documents.
Yep.
On an overnight raid on October 3rd, ICE detained every single person in a building in South Shore, zip tying children together, putting the Black residents on one side and the Latino residents on another. 37 undocumented immigrants were detained. On October 17th, one of our worker members at Arise Chicago, Diego, who's a 28-year-old immigrant from Guatemala, was leaving his shift at El Milagro Tortillas when he was abducted by ICE. He spent 4 days at what I would call the Broadview Abduction Center, where he reported there were no showers, insufficient toilets, and they keep the temperature intentionally cold in order to convince people to sign self-deportation orders. On November 6th, ICE agents forced their way into Rayito del Sol daycare center. Pushing aside students and parents dropping off their children, ICE abducted a teacher, Diana Santiano Galeano, an immigrant from Colombia. These are only a fraction of the stories of tear gas, of home invasions, of family after family ripped apart. But those aren't the only stories over the last 3 months. There have been also stories of solidarity and courage and compassion. Maybe, I don't know if I could say this, but maybe also at a scale that the Chicago area has never seen before. And I know many people in this room have been part of some of that organizing. People have organized school patrols to accompany our neighbors as they're dropping off kids. We have accompanied our neighbors to court appointments. We have distributed thousands of whistles to signal ICE presence. We have donated and delivered food, baby formula, and medical supplies to neighbors who don't want to leave their houses. At Arise Chicago, we're usually organizing workers, and often business employers are our targets, our opposition. But over the last few months, we've actually trained hundreds of businesses to know their rights as businesses in case of ICE raids. We've targeted enabling corporations. A lot of corporations have been profiting from this. Corporations like AT&T, which has a multi-million-dollar contract with ICE, or Reload Direct, which has made millions from relocating ICE into the area. We've participated in lawsuits limiting ICE's ability to use tear gas and detain immigrants without warrants. We have passed state legislation, and I know many folks were involved in calling their state legislators to push the ICER agenda that passed just a few weeks ago that would prevent or limit ICE's ability to enter courthouses local courthouses, hospitals, and educational institutions. And there's been local laws at city levels and the county level to prevent ICE from using any kind of public institution. And we've protested by the hundreds of thousands downtown whenever Bovino or Christy Nome have shown their faces, and week after week at the Broadview Abduction Center. So, in other words, we've been a stiff-necked people in Chicago in standing up for our neighbors. And so there's, I think, a lot to be proud of what's happened over the last few months. And we know that this isn't the end, even though I think we've survived or passed through a first wave of immigration enforcement. Bovino has promised that he'll come back to Chicago in March with 4 times as many agents. We have to be ready for what my coworker Jorge Mujica would call el próximo engaño, the next trick up their sleeve. So we too have to be kind of preparing and debriefing from all the organizing, all the protests that have happened, because the next time we're going to have to be even stronger. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thanks for everything you're doing. And just think about that for a moment. That Ethan said 3,000 people have been arrested. You may have seen the courts, the judge said 600 of them have to be released. Of course, that's being appealed now.
Yeah.
But just think about that. Even if that's all it was, right? It's that's what's my math here? 20%? 600?
Yeah.
40%. 20%. So a police force that is wrong 20% of the time, right? I don't think we would accept that from our local police force. If the Highland Park Police, had to release, a quarter of 20%, almost a quarter, a fifth. Every 5th person that they arrest, they have to release because they were wronged. So I think it's something to think about. And that 600 is just a start, right?
They were wrong about so many more than those 600. Yeah, I would just say this much. They were actually wrong about so many more than those 600. For example, none of mine are on that list. Every single one of my clients have been arrested within the dates according to this lawsuit in the manner addressed in this lawsuit, went to Broadview the same way as the 614 people on that list. Not one of mine is really on that list. So the number should be just about all of them, right? Just about all 3,000 could be released.
I totally agree. My point was just, even if it was only 20%, right? There would be a bad police force.
Yep.
Can I ask, there was a post that you put on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure the people here haven't had a chance to see it. So
it's possible you have seen it, possible you haven't, and I'm actually going to read part of it if that's okay. On Monday, ICE detained a father of 4 outside his home. His minor children contacted me completely terrified. That same evening, I opened his case, filed emergency paperwork with the immigration court, a motion for bond, which is kind of like bail, a motion to redetermine custody so he could be released, my appearance form, an emergency stay of removal to stop his deportation. The judge responded immediately, granted an emergency hearing for the next morning, the fastest date I've ever heard, right? It would have been a strong case. He entered legally, had valid documentation, a work permit, social security number, driver's license. He's a union journeyman roofer, fully trained and certified. Most importantly, he's a widower. His U.S. citizen wife, the mother of their 4 U.S. citizen children, passed away this year, leaving him as the sole caregiver to their U.S. citizen children. Under immigration law, he qualifies for something called a widower petition, a path to lawful status as the surviving spouse of a U.S. citizen. He was doing everything right. But the conditions inside Broadview detention center, abduction center, were so inhumane, still are inhumane. He couldn't bear it.
Yeah.
He described people being carried out on stretchers, possibly worse. Detainees were not allowed to drink water. The air was so thick and suffocating. He said people were gasping for breath. Now, people in my circle are not all that familiar with the Holocaust. They might not be Jewish, but when I hear gasping for breath and, detained inside four walls, I panic.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just one of us in this room, right? So, some were going into cardiac arrest. Officers threatened him repeatedly to sign his own deportation. With those cold showers that Ethan mentioned, terrible conditions, they usually sign and give up, right? So they used an ICE agent as a translator. Now, my client speaks English, but they used an agent as a translator because he didn't have his glasses.
Right.
And they lied to him about what was on this document. He was terrified he would be the next to collapse and leave his 4 US citizen children orphans. So just before we had our hearing, that following morning, he had already signed his own deportation. And by the time I could find out where he was on the other side of the border. Okay. His 12-year-old daughter, already in therapy after losing her mom, now has to process the loss of her father too. There's no accountability for what happens inside Broadview. It's overcrowded, filthy, and cruel. They keep transferring people in even when there's no room. Elected officials are regularly denied access to see what's happening inside. And there's no system for oversight, even when conditions amount to torture. Now, I wrote, I'm angry, heartbroken, and exhausted, but more determined than ever. This shouldn't happen to anyone, least of all a man doing everything right for his kids and his community. Now, this case did make some change. I posted this in a private group. Someone asked if they could share it. It was then shared virally. It went all over. And if you haven't seen it yet, now you know who the author was because it might be anonymous. But this is what started the ACLU lawsuit to make major changes. Now, judges and officials have been permitted inside Broadview, which is suddenly a lot cleaner than it was before. They have made some changes as far as unlawful arrest. There's a lawsuit that was granted, it's of course being appealed recently, to start releasing some of those people who were arrested unlawfully. And this really pushed to make some local changes. Again, this is the Chicago area, people who were arrested and processed through Broadview, but hopefully this type of lawsuit goes nationwide, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, there's hope.
There's hope.
There's hope.
Yeah.
So this man is on the other side of the border, but at the consulate to get some of the papers in order so he can come back. We don't know how soon that's going to happen, but December 15th is only a couple weeks away and he should be home by Christmas.
Deadly.
Let's hope. Let's hope for that. So that's kind of where the interfaith activity at Broadview has come into play as well, is that it's pretty much standard procedure when someone is in jail, they're entitled to see clergy of their choice, right? So a lot of this revolves around Catholic priests giving communion. I'm not sure how many Jews might have been among the 3,000. I won't say none, but but it's really standing with our brothers, the priests, who want to get in and communion, but it's also an opportunity to get in, which is like the elected officials. They turned away our senators at the door, right? And they've turned away the clergy over and over and over again. And that's what kind of led to what happened last week. And it's tomorrow morning we'll be with a deputy governor of the state of Illinois to talk about what happened on that day on the 14th and on the mistakes that the Illinois State Police, in particular, are doing When they first came out, it was ostensibly to protect the protesters from ICE tear gas, and somewhere the message got garbled, and now it's very clearly. I mean, even that first day when they were out there, they were definitely facing in the wrong direction. They were facing toward us, not toward, not looking to see what the ICE troops were doing, and it's continued that way, that they feel as if they're holding some kind of ground. I mean, this narrowing the free speech zone and holding this street, which is completely blocked off. By the way, no vehicles come in and out on that street. It's an exercise in absurdity that they're holding a street that only they stand in, right? It has no other use at the moment. So just stepping into that street is grounds for arrest, and that's basically what happened. And then afterwards, there was press that police were injured, and tell you if there were police, I don't doubt that police were injured, but they were injured by their own clubs, swinging wildly at people. They hit some of their own. I mean, none of the people who were arrested raised a fist to anybody. A few voices got raised. I think I'd love to know what you were saying, actually, but I don't know if you want to share that. But other than that, and actually the chant that went up, that you probably were gone by the time. I don't know if you could hear people saying, "Save your soul, quit your job."
Mhm. Love
Right.
your neighbor, love your God.
Yeah,
Save your soul and quit your job.
right. It's pretty powerful. So
I can speak a little
Yeah.
more, yeah. So I just want to share a little bit about some of the history of specifically communities of faith organizing at Broadview.
yeah.
So people have been coming to the Broadview Detention Center every Friday for 19 years. Sisters Sister Pat Murphy, who passed away this past summer, and Sister Joanne Persh, who actually passed away just about a week ago, and whose funeral I was at this morning, actually. They were really instrumental in passing legislation, statewide legislation, to ensure that in detention centers in Illinois, there's a right to religious visitation and pastoral care. They were out every Friday morning, praying the rosary and praying sometimes with interfaith groups at Broadview for the last 19 years. But in this over the last few months, there's been a kind of new urgency and a new wave of people who've been out there. So it started, and some folks who are just there to pray, some folks some kind of activists who are saying, actually, we want to get in the way of ICE. We want to block these vans. We want to stop the system, whatever we can. And I think that is also a very faithful action to stand in the breach, right? To put your body in the way of the violence that is happening. So on August 29th of this year, a group of activists attempted to block an ICE van. And Reverend David Black, who's a Presbyterian minister, was just the police liaison at this action, but they noticed that because he was wearing his clerical collar, that the ICE and police were treating him differently. And so he called me the Monday after the first week of September, and he said, "Ethan, will you help me get some more clergy out there? Because we need more folks out there." And so the next week, we had dozens of clergy at Broadview, and we were trying to pray at that facility, and walk through tear gas, through pepper bullets, through ICE dragging protesters into the facility. But we were undeterred. We came back week after week. And as we were out there, many of the clergy were engaging ICE in theological conversations. We would kind of say to them, are you Christian? Do you go to church? What verse in any part of the Bible justifies tearing parents away from their children? We chanted that chant that Rabbi Ike just mentioned. Love your neighbor, love your God, save your soul, and quit your job. And I think honestly, the initial organizers of the protest were surprised at how many of the people who were coming out there were people of faith, were clergy, who said, we need to sing, we need to pray, we need to be in solidarity with our neighbors. And so on October 3rd, the day after Yom Kippur this year, we had about 150 Jewish people who prayed a Shacharit service outside of Broadview. The next week there was a group.
Ethan Dobbin's beautiful, by the way. It's really good.
Thank
Really
you,
good.
thank you. And then the week after, there was a group of Protestant clergy who tried to deliver communion and were denied. The day after that, there was a group of Catholic priests who processed from a nearby parish. There was over a dozen priests, including a bishop, who tried to give communion and were denied. Then the next week after it was a Mennonite service, and the week after it was a Unitarian Universalist flower communion. There were some kind of unusual combinations that came about,
Right.
unusual and beautiful
Yeah.
combinations that happened at Broadview. The day we had our Shachrit service, we kind of sang. We sang some songs. Or no, this was the week after doing Sukkot, and we sang Hallel. We sang some songs of praise that were combined with an indigenous woman who taught us some freedom songs in Nahuatl, in an indigenous Mexican language. On November 1st, there was a Catholic mass that gave way immediately to a Halloween party techno rave. Seamlessly transitioned between the two. On November 7th, an interfaith coalition called Faith Over Fear brought Muslim prayer leaders to I was going to say daven, to pray their Juma prayers, and black pastors who were singing gospel songs. And I just want to share like what are some of what our goals were at Broadview. We were I think one of the goals was to impede operations, was to make it harder for ICE to do anything, right? And then a second goal was to build pressure on ICE to allow allow priests into the facility to pray with the detained. And a third goal was to highlight the moral and spiritual desecration that was happening in our city and amplify this call to shut down Broadview, to get ICE out of Chicago, to get ICE out of everywhere, right? And so on November 14th, we gathered for it was our like the fifth time in this 2-month period where we sent a delegation
Clergy.
of clergy to pray with the folks who are being detained. And they, ICE had responded to one of the previous delegations and said, this is actually, we won't let you in because you didn't follow the directions. So we were like, okay, let's follow the directions. We emailed them a week ahead of time, which is what they had requested. And we said, we have a delegation of these people with this names who are going to be there on this date. And of course, they were still denied. And so a group of clergy, of people of faith, took the street to try to enter, and were responded with pretty serious violence by the Illinois State Police and the Cook County Police, who I think were ashamedly doing protecting ICE, and which is such a shame. Yeah, and so
Protecting ICE from peaceful, religious.
Totally. Yes.
Right, I mean,
Yes, from
let's
clergy.
make sure that's clear, from clergy.
Right.
We don't present a big threat.
No,
none of
not
us.
at all. Not at all. Yeah, and so I was arrested. I spent about 13 hours in jail, which was thank God it was Friday. So I got to bring in. They gave us a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and an orange drink. So I was able to say Kabbalat Shabbat in jail and say Kiddush over the orange drink and say Motzi over my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And yeah, I think it's just one example. I think for me, a personal example for me, but I think an example for so many of the immigrant workers that I work with, for so many people, how how being grounded in faith, being grounded in like our relationship to to divinity and to spirit and to that power is so important. I'll just share one more small story from um, one of our worker members at Arise. So we were turning folks out for May Day this past year for International Workers' Day. And I coordinate a religious committee of our members, our worker members. Many of them are quite religious, are devout Catholics. And people were scared to come out to march on May Day because they said, what if, what if ICE is in Union Park? Like, how do we know we're going to be safe? And one of our leaders was talking about this, and she was like, we're scared, but so was Jesus when he was on his way to the cross. And he kept on walking, and we need to keep on walking too. And I'm Jewish. That's sometimes not sometimes the easiest language for me to step into, but I can feel that spiritual power, and the way that spiritual power is even more powerful when it's from all our different traditions, saying fighting and protecting the immigrant is maybe the most important thing that we can do. Yeah.
I haven't seen him come out in a few weeks. Maybe you know who it is. The guy who had the beautiful sign that says, "Who would Jesus deport?" Right. So, yeah, they've got some great language.
Yes.
That, we have it too, but people don't recognize
Yeah.
it the way, right?
Yeah.
But our tradition too is about loving the stranger and taking care of the immigrant. And so, I want to give people a chance to ask some questions. Do you have a little more you want to say
Yeah.
before we do that?
Maybe,
Okay,
right?
go for it.
Maybe. So again, what can we do as a community? There are so many organizations, just like Arise Chicago, even just like Makom, the little bit that we can do here, whether it's food for families who are afraid to leave their homes because there might be an ICE presence, any little thing that we can do, it really adds up. I don't know if we want to do questions yet.
Give us a minute.
Just 1 second. So supporting immigrant families with empathy and understanding, using our voices when it's time to vote, whether it's a local municipal election or whether we're talking about the general election, everything matters, right? But vote with factual knowledge of immigration laws. Remember what I said tonight, the leaders might not be telling us the truth, so do your own research. And then, partner with local organizations for direct action. For many years, I was the director of an immigration non-for-profit, and I did what Ethan does. I would go out in the community and give presentations, mostly to the immigrants, and I would explain their rights. If you're ever apprehended, don't sign your own deportation, call a lawyer. Make sure you have guardianship documents in place for your minor children. Who's going to pick them up at childcare if you don't show up, or get them off the bus at the end of the day? So I did a lot of that with the immigrant communities, but I loved going into churches that had a Hispanic ministry, and it also had the US citizen side of things, and I would talk with them also. And then watch how they would support the immigrants just within their same church. I just love to see that happen organically. Anyhow, go ahead.
I would just want to add one thing. We don't know for sure whether Bovino and his minions are coming back. I mean, he has promised to, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. I think they met stiffer resolve here in Chicago than they have in other cities. We learned stuff. We learned stuff from Portland. We learned stuff from Los Angeles, so we were better prepared. I think Charlotte has been prepared because of us and other places. But we have to be ready. If they're back with how many times the number did he promise?
Yeah, 4 times.
4 times the number of agents, right? We have to have at least 4 times the number of protesters when this happens. And I'd say much more. I mean, I'd love to have us out in overwhelming numbers in places. We'll figure out where when the time comes. But that's what we can be doing now is getting organized to be able to do that when the time comes. Want to add anything to that, and then we'll go to questions.
Yeah, I'll just say a little more about the large menu of things that people can do. We were also involved early back in September in organizing an interfaith march at the naval station in North Chicago.
A lot of these folks were there.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And partnering with Mano a Mano, which is an amazing immigrant organization based in Waukegan, North Chicago. So I don't like I think they have a rapid response network that I think is there was a reasonable amount of ICE presence of abductions in North Chicago and in Waukegan. And yeah, so find out, approaching those organizations, being like, how can we support? What do you all need? What do you yeah, I think is a really important one among the menu, as well as going out to these protests, identifying the corporate enablers, and then I think the other thing I just want to name is around using our money. So many immigrant businesses have suffered immensely from this attack on entire communities. So, go on a field trip and go get some tacos at a restaurant in a neighborhood or a town that is not, that has been under attack. And I think that's another really important form of solidarity. So the ways of doing this are kind of endless, and it's like up to us to continue to discern, to have the conversations in our own community with different organizations of how we can continue showing up in deeper and more powerful ways.
Great. So let's turn to questions. Are you going to run?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll use this microphone.
Well, we don't realize this, a lot of this is happening very close to us. In Wheeling, my granddaughter is a bilingual teacher, and I wouldn't have known this unless she called, she tells me everything. In order for the children to go to school, she teaches first or second grade, and the parents are afraid to leave the house. So a few of the teachers get up early in the morning. They pick up the children, they go to the door, they pick up the children, they bring them to school, and then they bring them home. And of course, then they have extra work at the end of the day. So I said, let me help you. She says, you can't. Number one, you're far too old. And the second, I love this kid. Anyhow, but the second thing is that there's laws, I guess, that you can't just do that. I think it would be a wonderful thing if we could go, this is right in our neighborhood, it's Wheeling, that we create some kind of help for these poor children that won't be able to go to school unless a couple of teachers are willing to do this, and most of them are not. So I'm asking you, is there something that we could form, something we could do out here in the suburbs to help the children in Wheeling? Or Highwood, that's right.
And either of you guys have a suggestion you want to mention?
Sure.
Morgan.
As busy as I am, I'm also on the board of parents and teachers at our local school district. The APT is what we call it in our town. And local communities can do that at a school level. You can get clearance for certain trusted adults. Substitute teachers have already gone through all the fingerprinting and the required background checks. And each school has 20, 30 subs on their list. So there's always something that can be done maybe at a smaller local level, for sure.
We have to go to the school.
Right, and talk to the school administrators. Now, in our school district, the first thing I did when I heard there might be an ICE presence, I let the administrators and the secretaries know at each school building what I do for work. I reminded them that if a student doesn't show up, let's find out why. Maybe they don't have a ride to school anymore. Mom and dad are gone. Their vehicle is abandoned somewhere in some parking lot at work or Walmart or wherever it was. I will tell you that I just saw today a statistic that school test scores in Illinois have dropped a lot because students are not able to study. They're not focusing. They're worried about where their parents are. They're trying to find food while now living with aunt or an uncle, right? There's so much more going on. So at the school level, I think that's where we can make those changes.
I just want to say first, Ethan, you're a wonderful speaker, and I love your spirit. you know, I love your enthusiasm. I was thinking we should start a GoFundMe, send you to rabbinical school. Wonderful inspiration to the younger generation.
Why should we punish him for his enthusiasm? I don't really understand.
Being Jewish is to be a social warrior, and to the joy, you know, that that comes with that. But that's not a question I'm gonna ask. That's what I'm saying. There's, you know, I actually live right near Wheeling, and on the other side of the road, it's primarily East Europeans and Indians. And it's always been a curiosity to me. Are they going, well, if you talk to anybody that's Polish, they'll tell you that there's tens of thousands of illegal Poles in the Chicago area. And I'm just kind of guessing among the Indian community too, because they all come here with work permits and they run out after a while. Is ICE going after them? I never hear anything about them going after other, you know, minorities other than the low-hanging fruit, which is the Hispanics.
Right. If I may real quick. Well, the easiest.
It takes a second.
The easiest way to find someone with an unlawful arrest without a warrant is based on what they look like, right? And if you find someone from Europe, they may look like us, right? So they're not going to knock on that car window. They're not going to stop them innocently walking down the street. They even proposed when they announced that ICE was going to be doing this Operation Midway Blitz, the Chicago Midway Blitz, they specifically said that they're looking for landscapers. They're looking for the lower end jobs. They were looking for work trucks. They said if they found a van or a landscaping truck, they were going to target that on purpose. And how many Indians do we know who are landscapers, right? So not many. Now, when you look at the list, it has been released, the 614 people who were supposed to be released, and now they're not. I kind of went through every single one, and there's maybe 3 from the Kyrgyzstan. There's maybe 1 I saw from Poland, and the rest are Venezuela, Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. So they're all Central South Americans and Mexicans. So maybe 5 or 6 from somewhere else. They're not targeting people who are not easy, right? They're not targeting the easy targets. Sorry, they're targeting the easy targets and nobody else, right?
Well, they preyed on that prejudice, right? And the prejudice that, you know, the drug cartels and gangs and things like that. I mean, again, it's, you know, I'm sure there's organized crime in India. I'm sure there are gangs and, you know, stuff, but it's not part of the prejudice that Americans generally hold. So they're not looking for anybody but Hispanic folks, Latino.
Question for Kim. We're used to the right of the accused in a criminal proceeding to have an attorney. And if they can't afford one is appointed by the court, if I understand it properly. But in an immigration proceeding, I don't know that that is considered the same as a criminal proceeding. And are the detained able to have counsel? And if they can't afford one, then what?
So you are right. So immigration law is actually administrative law because it is not a crime to enter unlawfully. It is not a crime to be here unlawfully. These detention facilities are not meant for criminals, right? How can you hold somebody in a detention facility and in the same kind of way that you would hold a criminal, right? So no, they are not entitled to counsel free of charge. There's no such thing as an immigration public defender. There are, of course, nonprofits that will jump in and help when someone cannot afford to find a private attorney. But the issue at Broadview and other facilities is that there was not even access to lawyers. They couldn't make a phone call. They could make a phone call, but it would last for 5 seconds and then drop on purpose. Their attorneys were certainly not allowed inside the facility, right? So the access to lawyers was very limited, if not prohibited, right? But no, there's certainly no access to public defenders in the immigration context. It's just not the same.
There are organizations like North Shore Legal Aid here in Highland Park, and although that was originally formed mostly to help people with landlord issues and things like that, but has been expanding into this area a little bit to help with some of those issues. But it's a much bigger problem than any of these small organizations can take on. Hopefully a network of folks can.
I have a question about ICE. It seems like it's an organization that's been given legal authority to commit violence. And I recall there was an ad that our lovely Homeland Security person said, we will give you $50,000 bonus if you come and work for ICE. Do we know who is working for this organization? When you've got so many, I'm thinking of Proud Boys, Area Nation.
Yep.
This is like, welcome, come and work, and you can beat up anyone with brown skin. So is there any way of asking, are there background checks on these people?
You know anything
Ethan?
about it? I mean,
I know.
I think the answer is obvious, right, about who's there. That's pretty obvious, but whether there's anything we can do about it?
I don't know if there's anything that we can do, but I will tell you, again, we hear news reports from time to time that one of the January 6th rioters became an ICE agent and he committed crimes and he was discovered as doing, atrocities. But I will tell you that there's so much fine print. $50,000 signing bonus after you stay with ICE for 4 years. They don't get that up front.
Yeah.
They don't get that up front. I'm so sorry. It actually says 5 years. Will this administration be in power? And gosh, I hope not, right? They're never gonna collect the $50,000. What kind of person accepts this job in the first place? There is no requirement for education. You can simply be 18 years old. You don't need a college education. You don't need any kind of weapons training, police force training. They are given a mask and a gun, and that's it. A mask and a gun.
What could possibly go wrong, Tim?
I won't even give my children a squirt gun.
Right.
Yeah. I just think to name one of the kind of like how do they have that to even promise the $50,000 signing bonus? How do they have that budget? The most recent federal budget multiplied the ICE budget by 17 times. That went in effect on October 1st, which is really scary. I do also just want to name the ICE budget has risen every single year under both Republican and Democratic administrations. And there's been a lot of organizing to say, let's cut that budget and use that money for immigration services, for other, all the other things that would actually address the immigration issue that is not ICE. So I just want to kind of invite folks to think about that like what really the intervention we really want to make is shrink the ICE budget. And that even under Democratic administrations, that has not happened. And so thinking about how do we remember this moment, and whoever's in office next, where there might actually be a window of opportunity, demand that the ICE budget shrink.
Before the current administration, was ICE following the rules more diligently, or they've always been this way?
I've been doing this for 21 years, 22. And I will say that they've always had oversight. There's always been a supervisor who manages whether someone was detained lawfully. There's always been, social justice groups calling them out and then making changes if something was done wrong. Now, one thing we need to think about, under the Obama administration, for 8 years, there were way more deportations than there are now, right? But they were all done Every single one of those had due process, their day in court, they were able to produce a defense if they had one. You know, this is not the first time we're seeing mass arrests or mass deportations, but this is certainly the first time we're seeing it with such violence and indiscriminate. You know, they're arresting anybody without justification, right? But has it always been this bad? No, but now it's more and more accepted, right? There's a certain percentage of people in this country who are excited about the violence. You know, they're fueled by masked agents with guns doing bad things. They're watching it like it's a video game or a movie, and they're excited by it. And that's just not humanity. It's not who we are, right? Certainly not American.
As Rabbi mentioned, originally the state police appeared to be protecting.
That's what we were told. They were protecting us. Yeah.
Seen firsthand, they no
Mhm.
longer doing.
Yeah.
What changed and what are we gonna do about it?
Well, that's why we're meeting with the governor's office tomorrow. So to clarify all that and see what they have to say about it. Some of it is that in addition to the state police, I think the county and local Broadview police maybe have pushed on the state police a little. I mean, that's the most fair thing I can say about how they've changed. I don't know if you have other insight into that as well.
Yeah, and basically the analysis from the governor's office is we don't want Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act and call in the National Guard. So their assessment is we're going to have the state police protect ICE agents, protect ICE facilities, because if we're doing it, that gives Trump less of a justification to bring in the National Guard, which kind of in one hand is actually like makes sense as an analysis, but on the other hand is doing the exact same thing you're supposed to not do when you're fighting a fascist system, which is to comply in advance. That like anyone who's ever survived an authoritarian regime says the most important thing you should do is not comply in advance. If they say, we'll come for anyone who does X, you say, you know, come, okay, let's see it happen, you know. And the governor, I think, on the one hand, has been kind of saying that rhetoric and saying that he says, you know, if you're going to come through Chicago, you have to come through me. But not all of his actions have lined up with that rhetoric. And I think that's what some of our job as organizers, as communities of faith who have real clarity in our vision, right? To say we're gonna put your feet to the fire, right? To say oh, like we need you to do everything possible. There's some things he's been doing, but there's more that he can. And so we're there to say we need you to do everything, use every tool in your toolbox to protect our immigrant neighbors.
Lou, so I feel like a lot of the things we're talking about are I don't sound the wrong way, Band-Aid solutions. And how do we get at some of the root causes? You addressed the fact that there's all this violence, brutality, and people are cheering it on. How did we get into this situation? One of the things we all know is that there's this proliferation of right-wing propaganda, which some people believe is legitimate news. I feel like we have to start at the source a little bit more in terms of addressing these issues rather than just keep putting Band-Aids on it. And I don't know if anybody has, you know, where do we go from that? How do we, because otherwise this cycle could keep happening.
Good last question.
The last question. Some of this is a chicken and the egg kind of situation, right? You know, the holy grail of this would be to rework all of our immigration system laws so that we had a fair and you know, a fair system that you could actually understand, and you know that a normal person could actually figure out what they were supposed to do in order to be here properly. And that's very, you know, that in recent years, some people have tried to do some of that stuff, and then it falls apart politically, and one party or the other, but usually one decides that they'd rather run on the issue than solve the issue, right? So then we get caught in, we're responding to whatever the administration is doing, and that's what I don't think it's fair to call them Band-Aids exactly, but we're responding, right? And so the answer is to elect more people who want to actually solve the problem, right? And to actually, would like to reduce the amount of money spent on ICE and increase the amount of money spent on making the system, fair and reasonable and, those kinds of things. So that's on us to elect those people. I do say, somewhat jokingly, we need 50,000 Jews to move to Wyoming, right? And change the electoral college, right? Because that, it wouldn't take that many in North Dakota to get to North Dakota senators, to Wyoming senators. I mean, those are some things that we have to do, right? So
I think with propaganda and with news that might appear as new, I think it really comes down to the leaders, the voices that are on the news, the voices that are interviewed, the people who have something to say with a big audience should be saying things differently, right? We can't tell them what to say, of course, but it comes from the top down, right? And it's just like here, if you say something is exciting about Makom and Vanessa says something exciting is happening next week and you pump it up and you say it with such enthusiasm, we'll all show up, right? We're listening to our leaders. And when our leaders say terrible, hurtful, harmful lies and fake things, that just, it's those followers to continue to follow along. So it comes from the leadership. They have to say things in a more political way. I hate to say it that way. It politically correct. Remember when things used to be politically correct before people could just say whatever they wanted to? I liked that. I also liked when there was a PR manager, maybe a speech writer, somebody, making sure that nothing was tweeted or reposted that wasn't proofread, right? So it comes from the leadership. I think that's the only place we're going to make changes. But one more thing on changes in immigration law. Every time there's a bill presented to the House of Representatives and it goes to the Senate and they have to vote on these things, right? Immigration policy is usually wrapped into something else. And if they don't approve the something else, the immigration policy is wiped, right? Or when they put out comprehensive immigration reform, there's a little tiny line item in there to destroy Social Security. So no one's going to vote on that. The whole immigration proposal is erased, right? So there has to be a standalone immigration reform bill or policy. And I hate to say it, but immigration lawyers feel like we know all the answers. I know exactly how to change this area. I know how to change that. What would it take to improve this part? What would it take to make sure that certain types of people don't come in without a work permit or without a visa or without this? There's quotas, there's numbers. I have all the ideas, but no matter what we propose, it's going to be shot down because there's something else in that proposal, right? There has to be another way, right?
I wish someone would listen to you.
Oh, I have all the answers.
Yeah, sure. But Vanessa, I want the last word.
Second last.
Yes.
I'll take the third to last. Yeah, I think the like anything that could happen, it only happens when there's enough political will, right? And there's enough of a social movement behind it to happen. And I think people in this room can be part of building that social movement. And I think also, just to name, I do think people of faith have a specific role, especially around immigration. The fact that there is a Christian faithful right that is associated with anti-immigrant policy is an inherent contradiction. And of course, all of our faiths are full of contradictions, but it's a particularly egregious one. And I think when people of faith declare loudly, not just with our voices, but with our bodies and our actions, that being a person of faith, that all of our scriptures say we need to love and protect the immigrant, it moves people. And I think even I've heard, just anecdotes of people who've seen what's happened at Broadview. People have seen priests who are denied to give communion. People who have seen Reverend David Black getting shot in the head by pepper bullets as he's praying. People who voted for Trump, people from Ohio, people who say, what's happening here isn't right. And it's by leading with that message of faith, I think we have a power to move a lot of people on this issue, and build. Obviously, this is it's a decades long problem, but is to build that use our spiritual power, and build that political will, to change something.
So stay tuned as we build that spiritual power, because we may have to do that. We need more people when we go out again in a few months. And in the meantime, but I really just wanted to say thank you to everyone who came tonight, everyone who's here in person, everybody who's online. I thank you for your support as I go out in the community and stand for what we think is right. And I don't take that lightly, because I know I have colleagues who are afraid to take a stand. They're afraid they'll lose their job. And I am not afraid of that because of people like you. So I want to say thank you for being here.
Before we clap, I just wanted to say, I knew this was an important topic, and special thanks to Alyssa Quinlan, who said, come on, we gotta do this. And I always have like a moment, is this gonna last an hour? There would be questions, but really, the three of you could have spoken an hour apiece. And we are so lucky to have all three of you, beautiful speakers, beautiful things for us to think about and to do. And I also want to thank everyone, and I'm sure you're all going to stay here for a hot minute if people want to talk, but I am going to turn off the Zoom. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. The last